The fine showed up taped to my front door like a warning from a mob boss. Bold red lettering. All caps. HOA violation, unauthorized outdoor cooking appliance. I stared at it for a good 30 seconds, jaw hanging open, spatula still in hand. My grill was 5 feet from my back porch, nestled on a concrete pad, nowhere near the property line. I used it maybe twice a week, usually Sundays. It wasn't ugly. It wasn't leaking propane. It wasn't even visible from the street unless you climbed a tree or deployed a drone. But none of that mattered to Patricia Simmons, the president of the Rosewood Heights HOA and a walking stereotype of every power-tripping middle-aged woman you've ever met. She had the haircut, the oversized sunglasses, the pastel cardigans, and a voice that could strip paint off a wall. Patricia had it out for me from the day I moved in. My name's Isaac Anders. I'm a welder by trade, a quiet guy by nature, and I bought this house 2 years ago with the dream of grilling steaks on the weekends and sipping beer in peace. Apparently, that dream violated Section 7, subsection C of the Rosewood Heights Community Covenant, the one about unauthorized outdoor cooking devices within visible range of neighboring properties. This is a joke, I muttered, pulling the notice off the door. They're fining me for making burgers in my own backyard? I hadn't even made it inside when I heard her heels clicking across the sidewalk. That unmistakable clack-clack of Patricia on patrol. I turned to see her approaching, clipboard in hand, fake smile locked and loaded. "Good afternoon, Isaac," she said in that syrupy sweet tone that always made my blood pressure spike. "I see you received the notice." "I did," I said, holding it up. "You're seriously fining me for having a grill?" "You're in violation of the covenant," she said, like a robot programmed to kill joy. "Outdoor cooking appliances must be approved prior to installation and usage." "It's a grill," I said. "It's not a wood-burning pizza oven. It came from Home Depot." Patricia sniffed, her nose wrinkling like I smelled of beef grease and rebellion. "And yet you failed to submit the proper application. The fine stands. $75 due by the end of the month." I stared at her. "You're not serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," she replied, tapping her clipboard. "And if you continue to violate the rules, further penalties will apply. We take compliance very seriously in Rosewood Heights." She turned and strode off like she'd just delivered a death sentence instead of a petty fine. I watched her disappear around the corner, then looked down at the notice again. $75 for grilling burgers on a Sunday. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was so absurd it felt like a prank. But it wasn't. That was the moment I knew I was going to war with the HOA. And I don't lose wars. By the next morning, I'd read the entire Rosewood Heights Community Covenant front to back. 52 pages of legalese, nonsense, and power-hungry language designed to keep people like Patricia in control. I highlighted every section that vaguely applied to outdoor appliances, property lines, and most importantly, land usage. Then I got to work. I started with photos. My grill? Nowhere near the property line. I measured everything. I documented every angle. I even checked with the city to confirm that my concrete pad didn't violate any local ordinances. I submitted an appeal. It was denied within 24 hours. Due to the visibility of the appliance from Lot 17's second-floor bathroom window, Patricia wrote in her reply, "The violation is upheld. Lot 17 was her house." That's when it got personal. I started documenting everything. Every time she walked by my place, I filmed it. Every time she inspected my yard, I took notes. When she fined me again 2 weeks later, this time for visible garden tools left unsecured, I took a photo of my rake neatly hanging on its rack. I wasn't the only one either. My neighbor, Carl, got fined for having a bird feeder visible from the street. The Owens family got a notice for their kids' bikes being left on the lawn for more than 20 minutes. Patricia and her inner circle, the beautification committee, were running the HOA like a dictatorship. But here's the thing about dictators. They get sloppy. While researching the HOA's founding documents, I discovered something interesting. The HOA's clubhouse, a smug little building where Patricia hosted her monthly rule enforcement meetings, sat right on the edge of the neighborhood. It was technically on a small triangle of land that bordered my property. A triangle of land the HOA didn't own. They leased it from a private owner. I dug deeper. The owner? A retired guy who'd moved to Florida 8 years ago and was renting the land to the HOA for $1 a year just to be nice. And that's when the light bulb went on. I reached out to him. His name was Warren. We talked. I told him everything about Patricia, about the fines, about the nonsense. Turns out he hated HOAs. Said they once tried to fine him for having a garden gnome when he lived in Oregon. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the phone when I made my offer. 3 weeks later, I owned the land. I didn't even need to build anything. I just put up a chain link fence, 6 feet tall, right along the edge of the property, which included the only driveway exit from the HOA clubhouse's parking lot. Patricia found out during one of her meetings. I was outside watering my lawn when I heard the screech. She came storming over, heels stabbing the grass like she was trying to kill it. "You can't do this," she shouted, her face redder than a ripe tomato. "You're blocking access." "Nope," I said, turning off the hose. "I'm fencing in my property. That driveway runs across land I now own. You'll need to find another exit." "There is no other exit," she shrieked. "Then maybe you should have read the land agreement," I said. "Oh, and since you're technically trespassing on my property right now, I suggest you step back." She sputtered like a tea kettle about to blow. "You'll regret this, Isaac. I'll have the HOA board involved. We'll take legal action." "Good luck with that," I said, walking back to my porch. "Maybe I'll install a grill while I'm at it." I didn't just block their exit. I forced them to cancel 3 meetings. The HOA started spiraling. Members began questioning Patricia's leadership. Her own vice president, a guy named Terry, stopped showing up. The Owens family started a petition. Carl joined in. People were fed up. And me? I was just getting started. The chain link fence stood like a monument to petty revenge and strategic land purchases. Within 2 days, word of what I'd done spread like a California brush fire. Neighbors who'd never said more than a polite hello before were now waving as they passed by, some even stopping to shake my hand. Apparently, Patricia had left a trail of resentment longer than the community's bylaws. New faces started showing up at my porch. People with stories. One man, Miguel, told me Patricia had fined him for putting up solar lights along his walkway because they disrupted the uniform nighttime profile of the neighborhood. An elderly woman, Ruth, had been threatened with lien proceedings over a hummingbird feeder that supposedly encouraged pest birds. The complaints went deeper than I thought. This wasn't just a control freak with a clipboard, it was systemic bullying disguised as governance. I started compiling everything. Not just my own documentation, but everyone else's too. Letters, emails, notices, some so absurd I thought they were satire. One letter to a veteran named Curtis insisted his American flag had to be taken down because it was not aligned with the architectural aesthetic. He'd served 22 years in the Navy. Patricia had no idea who she was messing with. I didn't stop at collecting stories. I filed a formal request with the county for the HOA's financial disclosures. As a resident, I had the right to see how our dues were being spent. When the documents arrived, they were a mess. Handwritten notes, vague line items, and expense reports that looked like they'd been scribbled by a teenager trying to fudge a school budget. But one thing stood out. Over $15,000 had been allocated over 2 years to Beautification Committee Initiative funds. That committee was chaired by none other than Patricia herself. And the vendors listed? 2 obscure landscaping companies. I cross-checked both with the state's business registry. One had been dissolved 5 years ago. The other was owned by Patricia's cousin. I printed everything. Then I made a quiet visit to the county clerk's office. After a short conversation and a few document scans, I walked out with a grin I'd been saving for a special occasion. That night, I hosted a backyard barbecue and invited every resident on my street. I didn't just fire up the grill, I went all out. Tiki torches, a smoker, a portable fire pit. People brought sides, drinks, folding chairs. Kids ran around playing flashlight tag. Felt like a real neighborhood for the first time since I moved in. Near the end of the night, Curtis approached me with a beer in one hand and a folder in the other. "I've been keeping records too," he said, handing it to me. "Didn't think it'd matter until now." Inside were photographs. Stamped, dated, tagged with addresses. They showed Patricia's house, her backyard specifically. A large, wood-fired pizza oven constructed out of brick. A setup far more extravagant than my modest grill. "I thought outdoor cooking appliances weren't allowed?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's the thing," Curtis said. "She had it built 2 years ago. No permit. No HOA approval. She even had contractors out here during hours when construction noise wasn't allowed. I called it in. Nothing happened." I stared at the photos. Well, looks like it's time something did. The next morning, I filed a complaint with the city's zoning and code enforcement office. I attached Curtis's photos, a copy of the covenant, and the HOA's own violation notices to other residents. I didn't expect a swift response, but I got one anyway. They called me that afternoon. Apparently, Patricia had never filed for a permit. Not only that, but she'd been warned during a previous inspection about unpermitted structures on her property. 3 days later, I watched from my kitchen window as a city inspector knocked on her door. She tried to stonewall him, but he handed her a yellow citation and pointed toward the backyard. She followed him out, arms folded so tight I thought she might snap her own elbows. They stayed out there for 10 minutes. When she came back around front, her face was pale and her movements jerky. She didn't wave. She didn't even look my way. Things went quiet for a while after that. The fence stayed up. No new fines came my way. But I wasn't done yet. I'd seen how deep the rot went and I wasn't about to let it fester. I took my documentation along with everything my neighbors had shared and submitted a formal complaint to the state's Department of Consumer Affairs under the HOA Oversight Division. Most people didn't know it existed. Patricia clearly hadn't counted on anyone digging that deep. Then I made one more stop. The local sheriff's office. Because financial misappropriation, especially when it involves dues collected from residents under false pretenses, isn't just unethical, it's criminal. Detective Marissa Dalton met with me in a small office with a cracked leather chair and a desk cluttered with case files. She listened carefully as I laid everything out. I showed her the falsified vendor listings, the personal connection to the landscaping companies, and the misused funds. I didn't dramatize anything. Just facts, names, and dates. When I finished, she leaned back and rubbed her temple. "You've done half my job for me. I've got witnesses too," I said. "People who are willing to testify. Some of them have been threatened with liens. Others had their dues raised without notice." She nodded. "We'll open an investigation. You'll probably be hearing from us again soon." The next week, 2 unmarked vehicles pulled up outside the HOA clubhouse. Officers entered and came out with boxes, file folders, a desktop computer, and Patricia handcuffed, red-faced and silent. The neighborhood came alive like someone flipped a switch. Windows opened. Phones appeared. People stood on porches, watching the woman who'd terrorized them with lawn citations and mailbox width measurements get escorted into the back of a police cruiser. But the most satisfying part? The clubhouse was officially shut down pending investigation. And since it was still sitting on land I owned and the HOA lease had expired due to a technicality I'd uncovered, I had the right to repurpose it. A week later, I hung a banner across the front. Rosewood Heights Community Free Library and Tool Share. Shelves of donated books lined the walls. A corner held common tools. Residents could borrow rakes, hedge trimmers, socket wrenches. No dues, no fines, no nonsense. Neighbors stopped by daily. Kids came in to trade comic books. Ruth brought homemade cookies on Fridays. Curtis offered to lead a basic mechanic class once a month. It finally felt like a community. At the next emergency HOA meeting held in someone's garage because the clubhouse was no longer available, residents voted to suspend all enforcement actions until a full audit could be completed. Terry resigned. 2 board members followed. A motion to dissolve the current HOA leadership was introduced and passed with overwhelming support. Patricia, meanwhile, was facing charges for financial fraud and misuse of association funds. The investigators uncovered over $30,000 in suspicious payments tied to family members and fabricated expenses. The case was handed over to the county district attorney. As for me, I didn't run for the board. I didn't want power. All I wanted was peace and maybe the occasional steak without getting a citation for it. But I did attend the next neighborhood gathering. No agenda. No votes. Just people. Grills fired up. Music playing. Kids laughing. And for the first time in years, no one worried about whether their rose bushes were the exact height specified in subsection 5. Justice wasn't just served. It was grilled medium rare. 2 weeks after the handcuffs clicked around Patricia's wrists, Rosewood Heights was quieter but not calm. Without her weekly patrols and snide warnings posted on door handles, the neighborhood felt lighter. But beneath that, there was unease, uncertainty about what came next and how deep Patricia's games had gone behind closed doors. The Rosewood Heights HOA was still technically operational, but its leadership had evaporated like spilled gasoline, fast and toxic. I wasn't directly involved with the interim board, but I'd been asked to attend a few transition meetings. Not to lead, just to confirm events, share evidence, and help clarify the chain of abuses that had brought the HOA to the brink of collapse. I agreed, but set one condition: everything would be transparent and everything would be recorded. The first meeting was held in the Owens garage. Folding chairs formed a messy horseshoe around a plywood table. A whiteboard leaned against the back wall, covered in scribbled notes and potential bylaw revisions. I took a seat near the back. Curtis stood near the front, arms crossed, wearing a denim jacket with a faded USS Blue Ridge patch stitched near the shoulder. "I don't want to be on the board," he said plainly. "But I'll keep showing up until we fix the rot she left behind." Angela Owens, who had a natural ease with public speaking, nodded and tapped a clipboard. "We've got 4 confirmed resignations and we still haven't located the treasurer. Last known address was a condo in Santa Clara." The checks Patricia signed to that fake landscaping company? They were deposited into an account under his name. "What about the missing dues?" asked Miguel, who now handled communication between residents and county officials. Angela glanced down at her notes. "So far, investigators think close to $27,000 was siphoned off over 3 years. Some of it was laundered through shell companies. They're pursuing federal charges." Curtis let out a low whistle. "That explains the marble countertops she had installed last year. And the new SUV," Miguel added. I leaned forward. "Did anyone ever confirm who else had access to the HOA checking account besides Patricia and the treasurer?" Angela nodded. "One other person. Her niece. She wasn't officially on the board, but records show she had co-signer privileges. She's being questioned." The room sank into a long pause. The scale of what had happened was bigger than any of us expected. This wasn't just a power-hungry woman issuing fines for overgrown grass. This was organized theft under the guise of governance. After the meeting, I stepped outside with Curtis, who lit a cigar and offered me one. I declined and he shrugged. "You think the HOA can survive this?" he asked. I looked over the street, porch lights glowing, a few kids riding scooters near the corner, someone wheeling a trash bin to the curb. "Maybe, but it won't be the same HOA." He took a puff. "Good. The old one doesn't deserve to survive." By the end of that week, the county's civil investigative unit had filed formal charges against Patricia, her niece, and the missing treasurer. Bank records, surveillance footage from ATMs, and falsified invoices tied them all to a network of fraudulent transactions that went well beyond Rosewood Heights. Turns out, they'd pulled similar stunts at 2 other HOAs before moving here. A local reporter, Delaney Price, picked up the story after a tip from someone, probably Miguel, and published a piece titled, "From Garden Gnomes to Grand Larceny." The HOA president who went too far. It went viral in under 12 hours. News vans showed up on our street. Not for long, but enough to let the rest of the city know what had been happening behind our picket fences. Meanwhile, the clubhouse, the one I'd turned into a community library and tool share, had become a hub of activity. Not just for books and borrowed socket wrenches, but for strategy. Residents gathered there to draft new bylaws, review budget proposals, and prepare for the vote that would dissolve the old HOA charter and replace it with something less susceptible to abuse. One evening, while restocking donated gardening manuals, I noticed a man in a gray windbreaker standing by the tool rack, flipping through a clipboard. He looked out of place, not because of his clothes, but because of the way he studied every detail like he was collecting data. "You looking for something specific?" I asked. He turned, revealing a badge clipped to his collar, Department of Housing Oversight. "Just verifying compliance," he said. "We got notified that the HOA clubhouse changed function." I nodded. "It's not under HOA control anymore." Land lease expired. He checked a document. Actually, the lease was never valid. The original authorization was forged. Patricia's signature was on a land use agreement she didn't have authority to sign. That made my stomach turn. So the HOA never had the right to use the land? He shook his head. Not legally. Which means their actions, including the collection of dues for clubhouse maintenance, are under review. Later that night, I met with Angela and Miguel to share what the inspector told me. Angela put her head in her hands. So not only did she forge a lease, but she collected funds for a facility that didn't legally belong to the HOA. She used it to host enforcement hearings, Miguel added. That's going to be a problem. The next morning, subpoenas were issued for every board meeting Patricia had chaired in that building. Any fines issued during those meetings were now subject to reversal. And residents who had paid penalties during those sessions? They had legal grounds to pursue restitution. Curtis knocked on my door 2 days later, holding a thick envelope. "I filed my claim," he said. "Reimbursement for every fine, plus damages." I'm not the only one. He wasn't. Over 20 residents filed small claims suits. Not for revenge, for justice. Some had been forced to repaint their homes at their own cost. Others had been bullied into cutting down trees, removing patio furniture, even canceling backyard birthday parties because of alleged noise complaints that couldn't be verified. The interim board voted unanimously to freeze all HOA collections until the legal process was complete. Dues were suspended, late fees dismissed. And for the first time in years, you could walk down the street without seeing a single warning sticker taped to a mailbox. Eventually, the Department of Housing Oversight ruled that Rosewood Heights HOA would operate under temporary county supervision while a full restructuring plan was developed. No new board elections could occur until independent auditors completed their review, which meant we had time to think carefully about what kind of neighborhood we wanted to be. One Saturday, Angela stopped by the clubhouse while I was repairing a broken folding chair. "We've had offers," she said, sitting on the workbench, "from 2 management companies. They're offering to take over HOA operations." "Let me guess," I said. "They promise reduced dues and increased property values." She nodded, with a side of strict enforcement and mandatory inspections. I shook my head. "We've already seen where that road leads." "I was hoping you'd say that," she said. "Most people don't want a new HOA. They want a neighborhood council. Volunteer-based. No enforcement powers. Just coordination for things like street maintenance, landscaping, and events." "That's something I'd actually support," I said. "As long as nobody's measuring my grass with a ruler." She laughed. "We can add that to the charter, no rulers allowed." By spring, the community voted to formally dissolve the HOA. In its place, the Rosewood Heights Neighborhood Collective was born. No dues. No fines. Just neighbors working together voluntarily to keep the place clean, safe, and sane. The last time I saw Patricia was in a courtroom. She didn't glance at me as I passed her on the way to the witness stand. Her hair was grayer. Her cardigan was wrinkled. She looked like someone who'd tried to build an empire out of measuring tape and forged signatures and lost. I testified. So did Curtis, Angela, and 6 others. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 3 years, with restitution owed to every resident she'd defrauded. Her assets, what remained of them, were liquidated. Her niece got probation. The treasurer once found was hit with a laundry list of charges and extradited from Nevada. The clubhouse turned library remained open. Donations kept coming. Kids still swapped comics. And the grill? Still there. Still fired up every Sunday. I didn't win because I was smarter or richer. I won because I refused to back down. Because I took notes, asked questions, and pushed when everyone else had given up. And in the end, we all won. We took back our neighborhood not with pitchforks, but with facts, patience, and the kind of stubborn, quiet resolve that people like Patricia never understand. They rule with fear. We fought with truth. By late spring, the last remnants of the old regime were gone. Patricia's sentencing had sent a ripple through the greater HOA community. News outlets kept circling the story for weeks, especially after it was revealed that she had forged not just financial documents, but also a lien notice that nearly cost a single mother her home. That revelation triggered a larger investigation by the state's Attorney General's office into HOA fraud across the county. Ours had just been the most publicized example, not the only one. But for Rosewood Heights, the house cleaning was complete. The neighborhood collective had taken root quickly. Instead of dues, neighbors volunteered for monthly cleanups and contributed what they could to a shared maintenance fund. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and no one had to fear surprise fines for leaving their trash bins out an extra hour. I was sitting on my porch one evening when a city assessor, a woman in her 50s named Yvonne Kim, stopped by with a clipboard and a steady, analytical gaze. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and said she'd been assigned to conduct a follow-up land use inspection based on a complaint made during Patricia's trial. I gestured for her to follow me to the back fence. "I'm guessing this is about the concrete pad?" I said. She nodded, scribbling notes. Yes. There was a claim that the HOA clubhouse encroached on land that was not only leased improperly but also developed without municipal approval. It was, I said. The lease expired. No permits were ever pulled for that structure. I confirmed that with the city months ago. "I read your report," she said. "Very thorough." She moved around the fence line, referencing a satellite map printout. She paused at the far corner where a small utility shed stood next to the clubhouse. "This structure wasn't in the original 2003 development plan," she said. "Know anything about it?" "I do now," I said, walking over. "Wasn't mine, but I found records in the clubhouse files. Patricia had it added 2 years ago. Said it was for storing landscaping tools, but the receipts showed something else." She raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something else?" "Security equipment. Cameras. Motion sensors. Even a thermal scanner." She looked up sharply. "That's not standard HOA equipment." "Exactly. None of it was registered with the city. No public disclosure. And the cameras weren't pointed at public areas, they were aimed at specific houses. Mine included." Her jaw tightened. "Do you have footage or logs?" I opened the shed. Inside, I preserved the equipment exactly as I'd found it. The DVR unit still had a blinking red light. I showed her the label, March 29th, 3 in the morning, a full view of my backyard as I locked my garage. She stared at it for a long moment, then stepped away and dialed her phone. 2 hours later, a plainclothes officer and a forensic tech arrived. They took the DVR, the hard drive, and the installation logs Patricia had kept in a weatherproof binder. Handwritten notes listed addresses, times, and what appeared to be observations about the residents' routines. It was all their names, behaviors, even vehicle schedules. The officer turned to me as they packed up. "This is criminal surveillance," he said. "Felony charges. She may be looking at additional time." I crossed my arms, staring at the shed. She watched us like we were suspects. Also, she could hold onto a little paper crown. The forensic tech nodded toward the DVR. "We'll notify you if there's anything else relevant. But I'd be cautious for now. If she had this level of obsession, she might have had help." That night, I replaced every camera on my property with better ones. I installed motion-triggered floodlights and made sure my security system backed up to cloud storage. I wasn't afraid, I was prepared. A week later, I got a call from the district attorney's office. They asked me to come in and review some of the surveillance footage. What I saw stunned me. Not only had Patricia secretly recorded residents, but she'd used the footage to manipulate votes and decisions at board meetings. In one clip, she confronted a board member, Terry, using footage of him returning home late at night with someone who wasn't his wife. She threatened to expose his behavior unless he voted with her on a budget amendment. Blackmail. That changed everything. The DA's office reopened the case. A grand jury was convened, and within 2 weeks, Patricia was indicted on 3 new charges: criminal invasion of privacy, coercion, and extortion. Her bail was revoked. She was moved from house arrest to county jail, awaiting a second trial. The fallout rippled further than I expected. Terry came forward and testified. So did 2 others who'd been coerced into silence. One woman, a retired school teacher named Joan, admitted that Patricia had used footage of her adult son who had a minor criminal record to push her into silence about misallocated funds. Joan's voice cracked when she told the courtroom, "I thought if I just stayed quiet, it would all blow over, but it never did. It just got worse." The jury didn't take long. Patricia was sentenced to an additional 4 years, consecutive to her original sentence. Total time: 7 years with no chance of early release. She wasn't just a petty bureaucrat anymore, she was a convicted felon who had weaponized a position of trust to manipulate and control an entire community. After the trial, I stood outside the courthouse with Curtis and Angela. The air was thick with humidity, but no one seemed to care. Angela looked out over the street. "Do you think she ever really believed she was helping the neighborhood?" Curtis shook his head. "Control isn't the same thing as care." Angela turned to me. "You never told us what made you push back in the first place." "Most of us just tried to survive it." I thought for a moment. A breeze rustled the courthouse flag. I got tired of watching people back down when they were right. That girl, fine, it was absurd. But what scared me more was that no one questioned it. It made me wonder what else had gone unnoticed. Curtis nodded. "You weren't just grilling steaks. You were lighting a fuse." On the drive home, I passed the old clubhouse. The banner still hung proudly, Rosewood Heights Free Library. Someone had added a new section, Community History. Inside, framed newspaper clippings and court documents told the story of what had happened. Not to relive it, but to make sure it never happened again. That summer, we held a neighborhood block party not as an act of defiance, but as a celebration. No clipboard inspections. No whispered warnings about lawn height. Just music, food, and laughter. The grill was fired up, same as always. Curtis brought ribs. Miguel handled the drinks. Ruth made a peach cobbler that disappeared in 10 minutes. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Angela called everyone's attention. "We've got a new addition to the library," she said, holding up a framed photograph. It was a picture of the fence. The one I'd built. The one that changed everything. She handed it to me. "Sometimes a fence doesn't just keep people out," she said. "Sometimes it holds a community together." I didn't say anything. I just nodded and hung it up inside the clubhouse the next morning. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what we'd stood up to and what we'd built instead.